Missing Link is the latest film from the stop-motion animation film studio Laika, the same studio that brought you films like Coraline, Paranorman, Kubo and the Two Strings, and this movie stars Hugh Jackman, Zoe Saldana, and Zach Galifianakis in this tale that follows an adventurer who discovers the last remaining Sasquatch in northwestern America. And that Sasquatch asks the explorer to help him find his distant cousins, the Yeti, because again, he's the last living Sasquatch in his area, and he thinks that he is the last one, and he doesn't want to be alone anymore. He wants family. I originally wasn't planning on seeing this movie because the trailers specifically didn't, hype up my enthusiasm. I thought that the trailers, at least the movie, looked gorgeous as normal with most Laika movies, but I don't know, I wasn't feeling up to it. And then I saw Hellboy last night, and I thought, okay, I actually need to see something else. I need to see something that at least has a semblance of being a good movie. Now, before I actually get into my thoughts, I want to put in a disclaimer that I always put in for those of the uninitiated, those who've never seen any of my videos. The way that I break down my thoughts is that I do a pro and con list. The pros are everything that I liked about the movie, and then the cons are everything that I either didn't like, or maybe they were lacking in a certain bit of quality. And I try to keep these sections separated for the most part, but sometimes I'll use one thought in a pro section to transition into a con section, or vice versa. It just depends on how everything goes. Okay, and then there's your disclaimer. Let's go ahead and get into things. The true heart and soul of this film is Zach Galifianakis, who plays the titular character, or as they call him later, Mr. Link, the Sasquatch. And Galifianakis gives one of the best performances in years. I honestly didn't recognize his voice a little bit after the movie started, and I barely thought about it being him in the role. And I don't know, the film's humor, which I'll touch on a little bit later, I was actually very surprised because it's perfectly calculated to Galifianakis' natural comedic timing, which actually helped with the pacing of the film for me. We also had Hugh Jackman as Sir Lionel Frost, who is that explorer that I was mentioning earlier. He's a bit of a self-involved monster hunter, and I use the term monster hunter loosely. Let's start with the performance. Hugh Jackman gives another great performance as far as voice work, and honestly, you can tell he's having fun with this, but I do wish that they had given him, the writing for his character was better. It wasn't what he deserved as high-quality actor of, his renown deserves. I will say this, though. Like I said, the character's not a hunter by the standards of the other hunters and explorers in this film that they showcase. He does not simply want to kill and hunt and kill these creatures and bring them back as corpses and stuff them. He just wants to take pictures, gather samples humanely, and just leave them in their habitat. The main focus of what he does is that, he wants to be invited into this explorers club, and nobody thinks that he's necessarily worthy of that. And honestly, I did like the change in this film. Instead of the story leading him to come out this way where, he starts off as a hunter and a killer, and then something happens and then he decides to change his entire viewpoint on it. He actually starts off where he doesn't want to kill anybody, and it did feel a little bit different. Now, that being said, the character is too shallow and self-involved throughout the film to the point where, there's very little redeeming about him besides the thing that I mentioned about him not wanting to kill. And, his redemption is this, his redemption from this self-involved mindset feels more cliche than it does natural. This being a Laika production, I knew that I would come in feeling impressed because the first movie that I watched with Laika was Kubo and the Two Strings, and that was because, an old roommate of mine and one of his friends from work said, "Hey, we're gonna go to it. Do you want to come with me? Do you want to come with us?" And I said, "Sure, fine. I could use a day out of my apartment because at that time I was living alone, and I hadn't been out in a couple of days, not including going to work for the past few days beforehand. So I went with them, and I was very impressed with what they did, because growing up, I didn't think too much about stop-motion animation, but it was so beautiful, and I thought it had an amazing story, and this movie, of course, has amazing visuals. This is definitely a sight to behold. The film is a rich-looking blend of stop-motion animation enhanced with computer-generated effects, and some really nice-looking 3D printing technologies. I mean, you just look at the characters, and their smooth yet very expressive faces, and you really see how much detail they went into with their puppets specifically. And Missing Link is also loaded with these breathtaking action sequences, including this really interesting Inception-inspired scene that takes place in a boat, and these gorgeously opulent set pieces that are epic in scope and just magnificent in that scope, as well as down to the finer details. I mentioned earlier that going into the film, the trailers hadn't really impressed me much, mostly because of the humor, and it just never came across as funny, but this movie showed that sometimes taking things out of context will either not be as funny in the trailers or just won't come across as funny at all. But once you actually see everything in context, then it can actually make way for everything to be clear. And there's quite a bit of a classic wit and everything with the gags and the banter in this film. And as far as the narrative itself, it's a fine story, nothing too unique or anything, but good nonetheless, that touches on the themes of loneliness and otherness, that feeling of being isolated by, either by your own reasons or by others. And I think they touch on these themes very competently. The main thing that holds this movie back, though, are honestly the supporting characters. These characters are mostly one-note and are given little to no character and just fit into these stereotypes, like Zoe Saldana's character, who is the widow of an old friend of Frost's. She just comes across as being the strong-hearted and ever so noble female character who can look out for herself, who has very little flaws. And then the villain, who's played by Stephen Fry, who, despite giving a really good voice performance, just never really moves outside of his character's color-by-numbers villain. And speaking of villains, there are two main villains, including Fry's character. And even though their threats linger much throughout the film, I never felt nor was given reason to feel that they were ever really a threat to begin with. They just came across as unnecessary obstacles at certain times for our trio to just surpass, move on, and then they show up, surpass, move on. I don't know, there was one of the characters, I honestly don't remember the villain's name, but he was interesting in his design and look, but he would just show up out of nowhere after the trio had, thwarted him, and I never got a sense of why he knew where they were, especially when they threw him off of their trail so many times in ways that, I don't know, it didn't necessarily make any sense that he would have caught up to them so quickly. It didn't make any sense to me. And those are my specific feelings on Missing Link, though the movie is brought down by those supporting characters, and also that my feelings on Hugh Jackman's character specifically. All of these characters who fit into certain film cliches and stereotypes. The film is still a fine movie that is elevated by a really good main character, Zach Galifianakis' voice performance as that character, and this immaculate, just beautiful, amazing Laika animation that we've come to expect from this Oregon-based film studio. I definitely suggest going to the theater to see this, especially if you have children. I know that there were quite a few during my showing, and they all seem to have a pretty good time, and I would actually say that this is a better movie to see than Dumbo. This movie definitely has way more heart, or at least you know, the heart is more apparent. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't hesitate to hit that like button. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you can keep up to date with everything that's going on in the channel. And also, don't forget to go down in the comments section and just keep the conversation going, you know. Talk about what you thought about my thoughts, and also give your thoughts on the film down there if you've seen it. I really enjoy hearing what you guys think about the different movies and topics that we talk about on here. Now all that's left to say is farewell until next video, all you casual moviegoers and movie fans, and keep on being awesome.